Good morning. Today's the morning of March 7th. It is Monday morning. What a great day. Today we'll be talking about the war in Ukraine, crack cocaine, that rhymes, and some Q&A, which doesn't rhyme. However, we'll be talking about all these things and more today on the Dear Church podcast. Actually, not more. It's just those three things we're going to be talking about. Welcome to the Dear Church podcast, where we exist to fill your ears and your minds with the study of God to see the world as disciples of Christ. My name is Sam Young. Who we have with us, Pastor Eugene Kim. So, Pastor Eugene, we haven't released an episode in 2 weeks, and a lot has happened in those 2 weeks that we'll get into. Today we're supposed to be talking about book reviews, but I think there are some pressing things that we must be talking about. We are seeing it all over the news, the war in Ukraine, where Vladimir Putin and the Russian forces have invaded the sovereign nation of Ukraine under, I think he said they were going in to suppress neo-Nazis, right? Or something like that to that
Huh.
effect, and then to free the people that wanted to be a part of Russia or something like that. I think that was the rhetoric going in. It's been condemned all over the world. I think except for the likes of a couple countries, I think, that have not publicly condemned it, China being one of them. There are a lot of things going on into this war. What are your thoughts, Pastor Eugene, as we're kind of thinking about everything that's going on right now? How should we be seeing this news?
Said it in our church, but yeah, we should definitely be praying for our brothers and sisters in Ukraine who are undergoing a lot of intense bombing, shelling, suffering. I'm sure many people here have seen like even the tank running over like civilian cars, like Russian tanks running over civilian cars out of nowhere, just to show their dominance, I suppose. So there's a lot going on. And so let's continue to pray for our brothers and sisters that are suffering.
I think as I was kind of reading and hearing the news about what's going on in Ukraine, there is a lot of propaganda. I think on both sides. On one aspect, this is the first war that has been so, I guess, publicly viewed moment by moment just because of the invention and just the use of social media. Now we can see bombings happening, the moment that they are happening, um, which we weren't able to before. But I think, with the use of social media, there's also a lot of false fake news that is coming out of Ukraine. I know that there was the story of the Russian warship that warned 13 members of the Ukraine army or the Ukraine military forces on Snake Island to put down their arms. To which the Ukraine military men said, "Go expletive yourself, Russian warship," something like that to that
Mhm.
effect. And then we heard that all 13 were killed. But now there's news coming out from Ukraine saying that these 13 men were not killed, but that they are alive and well. There's also the story of the ghost of Kiev, and we found that to be also a myth as well. And so there is a lot of fake news coming out of Ukraine. Uh, how do we discern wisely what's going on as we kind of are seeing all this news come out? What do we do? How do we read this?
Yeah, you would think that after the past 2 years or so, we would be a little more wise to any kind of propaganda out there. First is COVID this, COVID that, and all of a sudden there's zero on COVID, or some ridiculous thing on COVID, like when you enter a bomb shelter, make sure you keep socially distant.
Oh,
Yeah, or something to that effect.
mm,
Um, so yeah, there are things that are out there that we need to be mindful of. I just know that there's propaganda on both sides,
yep.
and they're obviously going to use this. It's just a lot of coverage. They'll so both the Ukrainians use it for their own benefit as well as the Russians.
Yeah.
Yeah, I even saw that the Ukrainians kind of give a report on all the I guess the Russian soldiers that were lost in this
Oh,
in the
yeah.
last week. In 1 week, they had what, 6,000
Yep, in 1 week.
in 1 week, and the Russians reported it as 600.
Yep.
So which one's right?
Yeah.
Yeah, which one's right though?
To be honest, I don't know, but it's a lot regardless whether it's 600 or 6,000.
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, we lost a handful in the so-called war in Afghanistan
Right.
over like the last 20 years.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, yeah, in 1 week, it's eclipsing what we've lost in Afghanistan.
And, there's threats right now of nuclear war breaking out too. And so I think this is kind of a tense moment for everybody, not just those who are in Ukraine or in Russia, but really for people worldwide. As this was unfolding, I started to think about how Christians should even view war. Is it ever okay for a Christian to support their country going into war, or for them to ever want to go to war? Is that ever okay for a Christian?
Polls have been done, and the interesting thing about polls is one person did a poll, and it was based on income level. And not
Interesting. Okay.
surprisingly, the lower your income, the less you wanted to go to war, or the less you supported war
Uh huh.
in like Ukraine or us sending troops to Ukraine.
Yeah.
And the more affluent you were, the more you were inclined to support it. That's very interesting to me.
Yeah.
And so, is it ever okay? I think we should start with the just war theory, and then we
Okay.
can go into that. What do you know about the just war theory?
I actually have no knowledge
No.
of the just war theory. I've heard it in passing.
Yeah, you've heard of just mercy?
Isn't that a book?
Yes, just war. It's like,
Oh.
let's just have war. That's what
Oh.
it is. No, I'm just kidding. That's
Oh.
nothing.
Is that okay? Yeah. Now I'm very confused.
No, it's the exploration of um in Christian theology when it would be just to have war. When
I
is it
see.
okay to have war?
Uh huh.
And so we have to start with certain premises that war is always a result of evil.
Yep.
So we'll start with that one.
Yep.
And if war is always a result of evil, then we know that it's because of sin war happens. We know that when Jesus comes again, there will be no more war because
Yeah.
he would have, destroyed death and sin. So there would be no war. So we have wars now because there's still sin in the world. There are, there's still evil in the world. So that's something that we have to always keep in mind. And Jesus even warns us that, even though there will be uh, rumors of wars and wars happening,
Right.
not to be alarmed, but to keep on, we got to keep on trucking. We got to still do what Jesus commanded us to do. So that's something to keep in mind. And where there's power and there's evil, you're going to have violent conflict, which is what we're seeing here.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of information out there right now. So if you want to know, perhaps like, dig into the mind of Putin,
Mm.
why Vladimir Putin would do this. There are a lot of podcasts and there's a lot of history because it's very recent history. When did he come into power? After Boris Yeltsin in the late 1980s, right? You know this?
I don't know
Oh,
him.
okay.
Yeah, I wasn't born then.
Oh, the late 1980s, right before Sam was born.
Yeah.
And he was first interim and then he became president
Yeah.
after that. But yeah, Russia was, it was broken up. The USSR was broken up. And Russia is now just a former, I guess that's how Putin sees it. It's a former glory of what
Mm.
it used to be. And I believe that many people speculate that he longs for those days when the USSR was a world power. But right now, Russia is a second rate power.
Yep.
Russia is not a first rate power. That's something that I think is very obvious.
Mhm.
But it's still extremely more powerful than Ukraine. Like just the sheer number of forces that they have.
Right.
Yeah, it's like locusts. It would like sweep up
Yeah.
Ukraine if they. And I think that's exactly what they're trying to do. But apparently they're taking a lot of casualty
Yep.
right now. It seems as though whatever it was, and whatever you speculate, it seems as though what Putin did, he started it very messy.
Hmm.
And so now he's seeing the result of just a messy start to this war.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of analysts are seeing potentially, a few outcomes of this. Either there will be continual like guerrilla warfare for the next 20 years in the land of Ukraine, or Russia's just gonna demolish, like sweep them out right away.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so this is a very sad state of affairs. So we want to go back to war. All war is a result of sin and evil, and something that we want to acknowledge. And so, when is it okay for war? That's what Christian scholars have been debating over time. Even C.S. Lewis has something to say to it, and
Mm.
even talks about a little bit in the Weight of Glory that you and I have read together, right?
Oh, yeah. Yep.
And so, there a time when we can? Is there a time for necessary violence? Is there a time?
Mm.
That's the question. Do we see it in the New or Old Testament?
We do,
Okay.
which is actually something that I wanted to ask about. So, I mean, in the book of Joshua, we see the harm warfare that the Israelites go through the land of Canaan, wiping out well, they were supposed to wipe out all the inhabitants of the land of Canaan, which they failed to do, but they still kill and they still fight and they still wage war against the nations that lived in the land of Canaan. But I mean, I guess for that one, God had explicitly commanded the Israelites to do that. I mean, we don't really see explicit commands from God today to go to war. And so, is it
No.
ever okay to do that then?
Well, I wanna before we get there, put a bookmark in there because I definitely want to get there.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the right to self defense
Uh-huh.
in the
Okay.
scripture showing us. We could turn to Exodus chapter 22, verse 2 to 3.
Exodus chapter 22, verse 2 to 3 reads, "If a thief is found breaking in and is struck so that he dies, there shall be no blood guilt for him. But if the sun has risen on him, there shall be blood guilt for him. He shall surely pay. If he has nothing, then he shall be sold for his theft."
Yeah, so this is on a personal self defense scale, personal scale for self
Yeah.
defense. And so we would justify then for even a larger scale. Like, let's say someone wants to invade the US. What are
Yeah.
you gonna be, a pacifist? And so this is why C.S. Lewis would say himself he is not a pacifist.
Uh-huh.
Um, and you should defend your household. You should defend your nation. You should defend its borders. The fact that you wouldn't defend its borders is pretty insane. And, you wouldn't defend your house, things like that. So if anybody would come in and terrorize your family, your wife, your kids, what are you not supposed to defend them? That seems a little ridiculous just because you're a pacifist per se. And so pacifism isn't something that we really see in the Bible. I think what they really mean by pacifism is I guess the leaning toward peace. Whenever we can have peace, we would lean toward peace. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So even in Deuteronomy chapter 20, let's do this before you get back to the bookmark. Deuteronomy chapter 20, verse 10 to 15 talks about that leaning toward peace.
Deuteronomy chapter 20, verse 10 to 15. And if I could actually ask another question after this, before we get to the bookmark.
Okay.
Um, so this is Deuteronomy chapter 20, verse 10 to 15. "When you draw near to a city to fight against it, offer terms of peace to it. And if it responds to you peaceably and it opens to you, then all the people who are found in it shall do forced labor for you and shall serve you. But if it makes no peace with you, but makes war against you, then you shall besiege it. And when the Lord your God gives it into your hand, you shall put all its males to the sword, but the women and the little ones, the livestock and everything else in the city, all its spoil you shall take as plunder for yourselves. And you shall enjoy the spoil of your enemies, which the Lord your God has given you. Thus you shall do to all the cities that are very far from you, which are not cities of the nations here."
So this is where God. So before we get to the bookmark, like we said, this is where God explicitly uses his people to exact judgment on the land of Canaan. So
Yes.
not only does he give, so the reason why this is different is because he's using the Israelite people to exact judgment that the
Uh-huh.
Canaanites deserved.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
So in a sense, he is the king commanding this. You
Uh-huh.
were going to ask a question?
Yeah, so I mean, you talked about the Old Testament, and I think oftentimes with Christians, and even I think non-Christians know this, there seems to be a divide between the Old Testament God and the New Testament God. And what I mean by that is this: in the Old Testament, there's wrath, there's violence, there's war, But in the New Testament, it seems like we hear, we read, love your neighbor, love your enemy, turn the other cheek. And so I guess when we look at the Old Testament text, two of which we just looked at just now, and we see the New Testament text, like Jesus' commands for us to love our enemy and turn the other cheek, how do we reconcile those? Are they two different things? How do we look at that?
Well, I mean, if you look at the reality of the situation, we have almost always been at war. There's always been a war. Very few times in our history do we see a time when there isn't a war being waged.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So just because it's New Testament times, we think that there is no war. That's not true. There
Mm.
has always been war, and there always will be war, like we said. And so, in the time that we're talking about in Exodus and Deuteronomy,
Yeah.
God is using them because He is, you know, the sword. He's the king, so he has the sword, so
Right.
to speak,
Right.
right? Just like in Romans 13,
Right. Right. Right.
right? Your king or your ruler has the sword.
Hmm.
So if he commands you to do something, you have to do something. And so
Yeah.
God being the perfect judge and perfect commander, the Lord of hosts, he's the one telling the Israelites to go out and fight.
Mm.
So he's using the Israelites to not only exact judgment upon the nations that he has declared judgment upon, but also to show that these are his people. So the people in Canaan knew, like, oh, these are God's people. These are the people that God took out of Egypt with those terrible plagues that
Yep.
even the Philistines and the surrounding like countries knew about when it came to the Israelites.
Yeah.
So this is what God's plan was. When we get into the New Testament times, yeah, there are these sections in the Bible which people use perhaps to be pacifist, but I don't think Jesus was a pacifist.
Yeah.
There's no indication that he was. In fact, he would take a whip to to his own people in the temple of God, right?
Yeah.
And so those are things that we have seen. The fact that Jesus is showing us in a greater detail about how we should respond to, let's say, violence or self-defense and things like that is showing us how we are to live out the law of God. So it's about loving God, loving our neighbor. How do you exactly do that? And then when it comes to, let's say, self-defense, he even called the disciples. So you could mention maybe turning the other cheek, but you also have to mention equally what Jesus said about you carrying the sword in one hand when you
Uh-huh.
go out into the cities because it's going
Uh-huh.
to be dangerous.
Yeah.
So where's the sword? Where's the sword, bro? No,
Yeah.
but yeah, you got to do that too.
Yeah.
So we can't just cherry pick one or two verses and just say this is the whole of the theology on war. We have to take it all in. That's why it can be a little complex, but
Yeah.
we want to go with the basics first. The basic is there is war because of sin. There's war because of evil. That's a very basic fact. Number two, fighting in a war is not necessarily a bad thing. You could be defending yourself. It could be defending your borders, your nation from invasion. So when we look at Russia and Ukraine, we see that Russia is the aggressor. They
Yep.
are in the wrong completely. It doesn't mean Ukraine is a good country,
Yeah. Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
I mean, it doesn't mean they were like saints. It doesn't mean that they were like perfect in any way.
Mm.
But in this conflict, Russia's the aggressor. Russia's wrong. Okay,
Yes.
and they shouldn't be doing that. Yeah, they're doing some really terrible things, and we are now just really concerned. Many people are afraid that Putin might unleash maybe some weaponry that will have lasting effects, either whether it's nuclear or biological. And
Yeah.
so those are things that we're looking at now. It's a very day to day thing, and yeah, I mean, just like anywhere, we don't know exactly how it's gonna end. We'll see.
Yeah.
But yeah, we have to definitely support the people defending their country and borders because I think that's a very Christian ideal.
So I guess, in talking about turning the other cheek, and this really goes back to the basic country of, I mean, oh my goodness, the basic question of, is it ever okay for a Christian to go to war? How do we discern then between in a situation whether we should be turning the other cheek or whether we should be defending ourselves, or are they mutually exclusive?
Yeah. I think we need to continue to. This is where I have continually said we need to grow in discernment. You got to know the difference between when it's right and when it's wrong.
Yeah.
It's not always going to be easy, and because that that kind of idea, those two ideas that I said, it's okay to defend yourself and war is a result of evil, can extend to, can I preemptively, let's say, be a quick aggressor
Yeah.
to prevent
Right,
further
right, right.
like future aggression against us,
Uh-huh.
which is what the US participates in, right? We knock out potential terrorists so that they won't like bomb us. We're not going to wait till they bomb us and then
Right,
defend.
right.
So we'll knock out these terrorists who are planning or plotting, right? And so is that right too? And up to what degree? So
Yeah.
those are things that I think we'll constantly debate and we'll pray and then we'll discuss. And it is in many ways for me, situation by situation. So we can't just put a blanket over and saying like all violence is just, wrong. We can't do anything because
Mm,
that's not true. You have to defend you were called to defend your family.
mm.
And in Romans 13, when the government has the power of the sword and it asks you to defend the country, you have to defend it. However, you would add that the government is not the ultimate authority, so it cannot go against the authority of God. So even if you were given, let's say, an extension of the power of the sword to exact violence, right, to defend or whatever it is in war, you shouldn't be going around killing innocent people,
Yeah.
right? You shouldn't
Yeah.
be killing prisoners. Those are completely against the moral law of God. And so that we shouldn't do that. And this is what we see in war constantly happen. But the Christian would not do that. Even if the president told you to, treat the prisoners like crap, as a Christian, you would not be able to
Right,
do that, right? So there,
right.
there's still conscience and morality still at play, uh, even though you are under the sword of the government.
I know I'm asking pretty specific questions that are obviously just, specific to each context, but I'm just wondering. So, for example, if the US were to go into war in support of Ukraine, we wouldn't be necessarily in self defense, right?
Yeah,
We'd
I think
be,
a lot of people will be against the U.S. going to war in Ukraine
mm,
unless it directly affected, let's say, our alliances. So
I see.
this is
Okay.
where it gets a little
Yeah.
complex. There is NATO, right?
Right, right, right.
And Ukraine is not currently
They have
in
applied, though,
NATO.
I think.
Yeah,
Right?
I mean they applied, but I don't know if they'll get in, that kind of thing.
Mm,
And so we see that that actually has played a part in Putin's aggression too, because they're taking land away from what
mm.
was formerly Russia. Instead of allying themselves with Russia, they're now
Yeah.
going to ally themselves more with European countries and nations, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so there is that kind of political aspect to it. And yeah, I mean, going into war to defend our allies, that's one thing. But a non-ally and someone that, we just see as bad. I think what we could do is what the U.S. has been doing. It's a little late, like you said. Maybe it's a lot late, but we can use whatever we have, um, as a resource to stop them, right? Deter them from that kind of aggression.
So you talked about self-defense being one of, the reasons why it would be okay that we see in the Bible as Christians to want to go to war or to go to war to defend ourselves. Are there any other examples that we can see in the Bible of where it is okay for us to go to war, or is it only just in self-defense?
No, no, like I said, the king can command you to go to war, and then you probably. So this is where the debate happens. If the king commands you
I
to go to
see.
war, um, yeah, is it lawful for you to do so? And
Yeah.
so that needs to be tapered with scriptural authority. It can't go above and against. So it can get black and white, it can get gray. That's why it's difficult.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's why it needs to be on a case to case basis.
Yeah.
So if I said U.S. is going to, um, let's say we get a new president in 3 years, and then that president, or maybe even this current one, says, we're going to invade Canada because Canada is terrible. And yeah, would it be right to invade Canada? And the answer is absolutely yes. But anyway, but yeah, even an example like that, we need to take it case by case. It's
Yeah.
like, why are we invading? For what reason? And it could be, I mean, probably obviously is self interest, but
Mm.
to what extent is it to defend our country from further attacks? Because let's say a neighboring country is just constantly a threat to us. And
Mm,
so it's just better if we just take that country over, which is basically what we did in Afghanistan. And so that's why the pullout from Afghanistan was so controversial.
mm.
Yeah, what do we were down to maybe losing one a service member a year, less than a handful a
Very,
year.
yeah.
I mean, it doesn't mean that's good, right? That's not what it means, but um, it's so that we could have, protected our interests, meaning we don't want terrorists coming over to our side, or we know we're closer to what's going on, you know, terrorist agency wise when we're there. And so that's why we had an interest in staying in places like Afghanistan, and losing that,
Mm,
we lost a big footprint of intelligence that we could have had. And so, yeah, like I said, it gets complicated and you could have feelings either way. Um, but what we all, like almost the whole country agrees on, if you take the poll, is that exit from Afghanistan was incredible botch.
mm,
It was a terrible, terrible exit.
mm.
And it shouldn't have been done. It shouldn't have been done that way.
Yeah.
And that has led to global instability. And so people see that's why Russia has invaded Ukraine. China is looking to take over
Taiwan.
Taiwan.
Yeah.
And so the US being a world power has been a reason why we kept these other world powers in check. And now we see that is shaken because the weakness that we're portraying. Um, yeah, so I guess the question now that we're going to face is the US a paper tiger? But that's just foreign policy wise, right?
You talked about the harem warfare in the book of Joshua that we see, and the Israelites being an exactment of judgment and God's wrath upon the people of Canaan. Um, it's interesting, right? Because that was their reasoning; it was God's command, and God was using them as wrath. But then, I mean, a lot of other people could say the same thing about all the wars they go to. So, for example, Russia can say we're trying to weed out the neo Nazis in Ukraine. Um, the US, when we were going to Afghanistan, we wanted to, preemptively knock out these terrorist organizations so that they don't attack us again. Um, how do we justify the war in Joshua? How do we justify, it was really just the cleansing of the land. Um, how do we justify that? Is God evil because he wanted the Israelites to cleanse that land? Isn't that even like a sense of, in a sense, ethnic cleansing in a sense?
Oh yeah, it was. Um, and that's God, you know, putting down his judgment. And when the gavel falls for God, it's irreversible. That's what happened to the Canaanite land. And he had promised the Israelite, his people, that he will give that land to them. That was the land flowing with milk and honey, as long as they continue to obey him. So this is, I think this is a really clear illustration of how God will then judge evil in the world. He'll use means that perhaps we won't even know, but he'll use means to show that you can't continue to do evil in the world and survive and continue to get blessed by God for it. And any kind of moment that you have on this earth is a blessing. I hope people understand that. The millisecond that you have of life here on this earth is infinitely better than no millisecond. And that's because of God's blessing. And so to take advantage of that, to spit in God's face after receiving that, is a grave crime and sin. So when God exacts his judgment, then that's something that we have justly deserved, right? And so I wouldn't say that, genocide, or, where we kind of eradicate a whole people's group, is just innately wrong. What if God has decided to do that? But the question now that we're facing is God asking anybody to do that now? And the answer
Right.
is no.
Right,
The
right,
answer is
right.
no, because we're beyond that time. This is beyond that covenantal time where we are shown that it's Jesus who's king. He doesn't need to be made king. He is king. And Jesus will come again to, um, with the new heaven, new earth. And that's going to be final. Until then, what is our job? Our job isn't to go and conquer lands. Our job is to go and make disciples of all nations. So that's
Yeah.
what we're doing. And there's a different time, different covenant. I mean, if I lived in Old Testament times, I think it would have been exciting, but
Mm,
definitely more dreadfully like
yeah.
scary. I like that's why you could be a wuss of a man and be here.
Yeah.
If you're a wuss of a man and lived in those times, you would have definitely gotten killed, right?
Who do you think would have died for No, I'm just kidding. But I think it'd be Brian.
I knew you said Brian.
But, the reason why I asked that question, though, before is because, um, I've even read, like, conspiracy theorists saying that Russia invading Ukraine is God's judgment on the Church of Ukraine because they were corrupt and doing a poor job, and I feel like anybody could really have this kind of, quote, unquote, "God-ordained mission," and that's why they're waging war, right? Anybody could use that excuse, but like you just said, God does not do that today, right?
Well, I mean, I'd be wary of saying stuff like that with such assurance.
Mhm,
You don't know. It
mm,
could be. You don't know. I mean, saying that with such confidence seems a little prideful to
mm.
me. Like, how do you know exactly what's been going on in the Church of Ukraine? Like, personally, I don't
Yeah,
know. So I don't
yeah,
pass judgment. In that sense, we don't pass judgment on our brothers and sisters in the condemnation wise. We just talk to them about um, the gospel and
yeah,
what the gospel is. And that's what we ought to do. And if they were overtly not doing that, then handing them over to Satan means you had jurisdiction over them. That means they were members of your church where you were the elder of, and then you could do that. So I'd rather us focus on the jurisdiction we've been given. So
yeah,
you have a locality that you've been placed in. There's a church that you attend. You have elders over you, or you are an elder. Then you got to do well by what you've been given,
mm,
and just I don't know, speculate on what the state of the church in Ukraine seems a little bit much to me. Um, Imagine that happened to us, bro. Imagine that happened to us when we were not aware
mm.
of the crazy stuff we were doing when we were younger, right? Remember when you
I
like
wasn't
used
doing
to
crazy stuff.
fall on the floor and wriggle around?
No, I never did that unless I
Yeah.
was doing the worm.
But yeah, imagine like we got judgment right when we did wrong. None of us would survive.
Mm,
We've been given incredible grace and we should be thankful for that. We That's why we pray that people turn from their sins with a quickness. And we ask for mercy. This is something that we should desire to do.
so our producer, Chinsuk just brought up a great question, which I didn't think of. Um, but, we talked about defending lives as a just cause to go to war, What if we do go to war and it's to protect the lives of those who may be affected?
Like the innocent.
Yeah, I mean, then isn't that just? And then in that aspect, aren't many wars then just?
I think that was a great question. Maybe the best question that we've received regarding this war topic.
I was kidding. I actually asked that question.
Yeah, no,
Mm,
seriously. We can say that about a lot of things then.
yeah.
Who gets to decide? That's why you need wise leaders, number one.
Uh-huh.
You need to have wise leaders. Secondly, our let's say our responsibility, our loyalty lies with again, your citizenship, your family, those kind of things. If we can side with those that are wrongly suffering, if we can even say that, but let's say, for example, let's take the Uyghur camp.
Yeah.
Should we stand up for them?
Mm,
I think absolutely.
yeah.
But to what extent? Should we go to China and then fight this war? And I
Mm,
think that's where I would probably draw the line and not do that. But
yeah.
we should say something. So in this day and age, we can only see in extremes. And that's, I think, the problem that we have. There's no nuance, there's no understanding that while you can say this is wrong, it doesn't mean that you have to go there and fight. So it's like all you people that are saying anything about the Uyghurs, why don't you come here and free them? That kind of
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah.
No, that's not how it works. We can still say it's wrong, and then we can impose the things that we can impose with the power that we have. But I don't think that the U.S. going into sovereign land that belongs to China is a good thing,
Mm,
right? And so, unless we're going to take them over, unless
yeah.
I don't know, those are crazy things.
Yeah.
So I don't think that's going to happen. I think that would cause a massive bloodshed that would be just terrible for humanity and the
Mm,
world. But I do think that all of this is happening because of the weakness that our nation is portraying. So when the strongest nation in the world shows weakness, then you see all these other nations vying for supremacy.
Yeah.
And it's just the natural order of things. So the US may not be number one for very long if we keep up this pace. And our number one goal is to promote diversity in the military as
Mm.
opposed to skill and opposed to,
Yeah.
strength, athleticism, things like that. Instead of promoting those things,
Yeah.
it's diversity or something, as if that was something that we needed to have. And our
Right.
enemies see this and they're laughing at us. Our enemies see this and know that not only is this not God ordained, this is not even nature ordained. This is not
Mm.
natural order of things. All throughout nature, we see that there's a clear difference between male and female, and
Mm.
yet this country, the supposed the strongest country in the world has ever seen, we're confused about the basic natural order of things. Of course, when the strongest guy gets shaken, someone else wants to be the biggest guy in the schoolyard, and that's what happens,
Yeah.
and that's what we're seeing. And so that's why we have all these questions now. Should we invade? Can we do this? Can we do that? And I think the bigger thing for me is, yeah, that's what happens when you promote all this really, really stupid ideology that
Mm.
is so basic that a 2-year old gets it. But all of a sudden, you have people graduating with degrees with racial diversity or inclusivity and getting jobs from that, which is completely pointless.
Yeah.
And like even that statement that I've said can be controversial. It's like, what do you mean? Right. Because again, we can only think in extreme. So if I'm not for racial diversity, then I'm for racism as if those are the only two options out there. And so this is um this is just an indictment on our foolishness.
Mm.
As long as we continue to promote this, we'll see more and more instability in the world. Questions will come up. These hypotheticals will come up, um, and we'll have to deal with them, I suppose, eventually.
Yeah.
But we have to deal with them because we're showing such massive weakness
Mm.
in our leadership right now.
Okay, so I wanted to talk about crack cocaine, but you brought up something that now we have to address because these are one of the Q&A questions and it connects. You talked about the Uyghur Muslims, and nope, I'm not going to do that because we have a Q&A section, so I'm not going to do that.
Hey, you got to play the jingle.
Yeah, I'm sorry. By the way, people have been telling me we need to change that thing,
Yeah,
but no one knows who made it. I didn't make it.
yeah. It was Sam Yang.
No, no, no. Well, I
He's
wouldn't.
very proud of it.
No, it would be Don Katsu, first of all, but it
What you got
wasn't
in the
me.
bag? But you have to say it. What you got?
Yeah, yeah, we need a beat or something. But I wanted to talk about crack cocaine, and there was a plan that was, I think, proposed by the Biden administration,
Yes,
right? It was called the Harm Reduction Plan,
yes.
and this was a $30 million grant program from the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration that would include subsidizing drug paraphernalia, and this is from the Independent. And safe smoking kits are one piece of equipment on a list of 20 items that were outlined on this grant application for harm reduction. And the primary purpose of the program was to reduce the risk of infection among drug users. And, when our church actually went to missions in Philadelphia and where do we go? In northern Philadelphia, in Kensington, the team members would say they saw police officers distributing clean needles because the residents there would be doing drugs with dirty needles, and it was less dangerous for them to be doing drugs with clean needles than dirty needles, obviously.
Yeah.
um so I guess my question is with this too, with the government handing out safe smoking kits, does the ends ever justify the means? Should we ever be doing anything like this?
Yeah. I think for me, the answer is a little bit complex, but we'll get to it. Um, there's a story I read about Mike Pence before he became vice president. And
Mm.
you all know Mike Pence is a very strong evangelical, like Christian. Um, he purports himself to be, at least, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know the man, so uh, when he was governor, he was faced with a similar situation. And I remember reading about it, and that stayed with me. And how he had to make this decision. There were so many people in his state that were dying of AIDS. HIV was being spread. It looked like it could have it would be an epidemic in that state unless he did something about it. Because they were sharing needles, and so they asked him to consider distributing clean needles.
Mm,
So people will get clean needles. So they can not share the needles and spread HIV and have so many people dying or get infected by this disease.
yeah.
He said, "Let me think about it. Let me pray about it for 3 days." And after 3 days, he said, "Okay, let's do it."
Mm,
He got flack from both sides, from obviously the conservative side for giving out the needles, and
yeah.
from the liberal side for not handing out the needles fast enough. He's like,
Ah,
"Why'd you wait 3 days when if this is a raging forest fire? Why are you waiting 3 days until more damage is done?"
right.
So no one was happy with his decision. I remember reading about it and how difficult it is to be a leader in the world. So I think we need to continue to pray for leaders. Some decisions are just not going to be good. Some decisions will be a lose lose. It's just a matter of tapering those losses, and that's something that I sympathize with people that have to face these decisions. People in power. The crack cocaine one is a little different for me. Passing out clean crack pipes.
Yeah.
Uh, is it so? The question that we're always faced with is, look, if you have most drug addicts don't have all the money in the world. Obviously, they have a
Mm,
very limited uh, resource.
yeah.
And so if they have just, a certain dollar amount to buy drugs, they're not going to spend it on getting some clean needle or pipe
Right.
or whatever.
Right.
They're going to spend most of it on the drug itself.
Mm,
And so if you're a drug addict, what are you going to do? And so if we have millions of dollars, where are we going to put our resources into giving them clean crack pipes? To me, that seems a little backwards. We got to get these drugs off the street. Number one. Number two, we got to get rehabilitation centers in like massively. That being said, if those two things are being done,
yeah.
and then we still see like, is there anything more we could do? Perhaps there could be a debate.
Mm,
But for me, handing out those like harm reduction has been tried by not just the U.S. by many different countries out there in the world. Okay, so people are trying to see, and it's usually for needles, not pipes.
yeah.
So pipes is a new thing, and I think pipes, the research just isn't there. It could be in the future that we see that this will mitigate loss
Mm,
and death and things like that, but I just don't see it. So I don't know enough to really comment fully on it.
mm,
But I do know this, that if the government doesn't do the aforementioned things of getting rehabilitation out there and getting the drugs off the street, and they're
yeah.
doing this one, then
Yeah.
they've gone completely backwards,
Yeah.
which is, I think, the criticism of what the government's doing. Why are you, like, distributing these things without even trying to get these things off? Why is that? And if it's because of their ideology, then just know that this ideology is just so bankrupt
Mm,
that it can't even stop people from shooting up drugs. That's when you know the society is we're just mangled. We're gonna get destroyed. There's no way a society can survive if we can't tell from our left and right. We can't tell from basic, this is right and this is wrong.
yeah.
Like smoking crack cocaine is wrong. And just because crack is some kind of it's a drug that people of lower income use as opposed to cocaine, even though it's the same material.
Yeah.
They want to show equity. And so for equity, they want to give pipes.
Yep.
That's an
Yep.
insane reason to give pipes if that's the reason.
Yeah.
And so this is so insane. This is so stupid that the fact that we're doing this shows the stupidity of the government. It shows how lost they are in the whole like scheme of things, where our country needs to go, what we really need to be fighting for. And yeah, I think it starts because we have adopted this wokeism, and it goes down to, so even if you are a little bit woke, there are people that still don't like it. But these are people that fully adopted this leftist like philosophy,
Mm,
and that's why. It's just bankrupt. It's devoid of any good thing. That's how bankrupt handing out crack pipes would be if that's the case.
I think maybe on a more relatable level for those that are listening, parents that say kids can drink alcohol inside their house or party at their house or even party in high school because they want them to get it out of their system before I said that weird. Before they want them to get it out of their system before they head off to college, or maybe even organizations handing out condoms because people are going to have sex anyway. In these types of scenarios, does the end ever justify the mean, or is it just really on a situation by situation basis?
I think alcohol and sex are two different things.
Hmm.
And so if you want to teach your child how to drink because you believe that they'll be exposed to alcohol once they go to college, no matter what,
Yeah.
that's something perhaps I can be sympathetic to. I mean, I wasn't, and I don't drink alcohol now, and I'm fine.
Mm.
I suppose there are reasons, perhaps, that one can sympathize with. I don't think it's the wisest thing, obviously.
Yeah.
There are ways that we could teach our children the way to go, and drinking and abstaining from drinking until it's a proper time is there for a reason,
Mm.
right? But that's one thing. That's something I guess that's worth a debate on, depending on what you want to do.
Yeah.
But the other thing is just wrong. Sex outside of marriage is not like something that you could possibly do.
Right.
It's just wrong in the Bible. You can teach a child that drunkenness is just straight up wrong, and taking sips of like beer is not a terrible thing.
Yeah.
Teaching them to get drunk, that's a stupid thing. So even that, I would have to, probably figure out exactly what you mean or what the parent meant by that.
Hmm.
But yeah, sex outside of marriage is wrong. By handing out condoms, what are you doing? You are eliciting, even, but encouraging wrong behavior,
Mm.
behavior that will harm young people for the rest of their lives.
Mm.
And it's because they don't think so. They think sex outside marriage is a normal thing. You just don't want a baby, right? Right. And they want to detach pregnancy from the sex act,
Yeah.
which is not the way the Bible teaches us. They're all interconnected, and it's in the confines of a marriage between a man and a woman.
I've actually never seen an organization give out condoms. I was just thinking, like, what if
No, they
this
do
were
it
to
in
happen?
schools and things. You can
Okay.
get it from your guidance counselor. Yeah, yeah.
Oh,
And
wow.
so yeah, you could do that. So there's more than one contraceptive now. I believe they even give you pills.
Wow. Your guidance counselor does these things.
Yeah, I think they can do that,
All
Chuck.
he did for me was give me a bad recommendation. Wow.
You asked your guidance counselor for a
I
recommendation?
think we had to. And he didn't really know me because I didn't really do school well. But
That's nice.
anywho,
That depends on the school. Yeah.
yeah, I know college health centers do. Yeah, I do have them. But then it's not really necessarily like a Christian thing. But I was even thinking about people that promote abstinence and saying that premarital sex is wrong, but giving out condoms anyway because people are going to have sex anyway. So might as well be safe while you're doing it. That kind of thing.
Yeah, yeah. That's still wrong.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. If it's wrong, you have to teach it's wrong.
Right.
You can't support that kind of behavior, just even if they're going to do it anyway.
Yeah.
Right. And then you have to live with the consequences. That's what life is about.
Right.
Right. If you have sex outside of marriage and you have a baby, the Bible actually talks about that. you know,
Mm.
the Torah has extensive laws regarding that. How you need to take care of the child. How you need to like get married to them. Otherwise, yeah, you have to pay a large sum and things like that. There are things already in the Bible talking about that because, yeah, people are gonna sin. Sinners are gonna sin, right?
Mm.
And so, what do we do with that? That's why we have the law. But to encourage people to continue to sin, that is outside.
Yeah.
That's out of bounds.
Thank you for that, Pastor Gene. We're going to quickly go into our Q&A. We have a lot of questions today. So I think we need a beat.
We need a beat.
What you got in the bag? What you got in the bag?
What you got in the bag?
What you got in the bag? What you got in the bag?
What you got in the bag?
What you got in the bag? What you got in the bag?
What you got in the bag?
What you got in the bag? What you got in the bag?
What you got in the bag?
Pastor Gene, I'm going to be reading this question that we received through the email.
Is it gonna be long?
It is.
You sure you want to do that? You can't abridge it.
I think it's a little long, so I think I'll give you the abridged version. Just give me a second while I bridge it. So for this question, I just want to quickly bridge this question because it's quite long. In the Old Testament, we read of a lot of numbers, right? We read about generations. And when we read the Old Testament and their record keeping, do we always view these numbers as being exact records of time?
That's the question. That's a terrible abridgment.
Okay, I'll abridge this. So this is an email that I'll abridge. Recently, one of my classes, my professor had us listen to a podcast he did where he talks about the historicity of Exodus, and he brought up the topic of the accuracy of timekeeping in the Bible. He claimed that they were not accurate. Um, for certain details in the Bible, we see that perhaps the math doesn't always work out. If a generation is 30 years and there's 4 generations from, anyway, sometimes the math just doesn't work out. So my professor gave the explanation that the ancient Near Eastern cultures weren't necessarily in the business of keeping exact records of times and placed a lot of emphasis on their ancestry. So the value of years, at least before the records of the kings, were off. How do we view the historical narrative of the Bible? For example, can the wandering of the people of Israel have been 39 years instead of 40, and the writer just wrote 40? I'm very curious because there are other parts of the Bible we don't take at face value. The most obvious one being when Paul said women should stay silent in the church. He obviously wasn't saying that they can't sing or pray. But what Paul was really getting into was the idea of the separate roles of men and women in the church. I know it's different, but can we say, when looking at the historical parts of the Bible, that there are parts where it's not face value, but it's just really saying a long time instead of an actual 480 years? So, how does this factor into our understanding of the inerrancy of the Bible? I believe the Bible is the inerrant and infallible word of God, but does inerrancy necessarily imply historical accuracy, or does it mean something else? Was
You
that a good?
definitely read the whole question.
No, I didn't. There are a lot of parts that I took out.
Fine. This is a very good question. I'm very happy for it. Second best question today.
I asked it too.
Yeah. When I first heard the question, I was very sad, and I mourned the state of affairs our schools are in,
Mm.
and these so-called Bible teachers teaching what they do. I think there's even a website that you could go on. I don't recall where they have all these so-called errors in the Bible.
Mm.
So to believe that the Bible is inerrant is something like not just unintellectual, but it's like insane. It's
Yeah.
beyond like reason, things like that. And so there are people that are constantly throwing attacks at the Bible. Interestingly enough, the Bible has withstood those attacks for thousands and thousands of years.
Yeah.
So you have to also wonder why. Is it because people are stupid and you guys are the only enlightened ones? And I believe people that think that really do believe that they're the only enlightened ones and everyone else is stupid. There has always been an answer for a question that people have given. I'm not saying those answers are easy to come by. Yeah, some answers are really tough, like number stuff. Some of them can be difficult. But we don't know context.
Yeah.
But when we say things like that, and we don't know exactly how people regarded numbers, even in that time period. So could it have been 39 years and 11 months, and they would have rounded up to 40? Absolutely. Would there have been anything wrong with that? Absolutely not.
Mm.
Yeah, there's nothing wrong with that. It's just saying 40. Or if you say, what if there were 14,000 men, but that's what we wrote, but there's actually 13,992 men. Is that wrong for them to say 14,000? Absolutely not. When someone asks me how many people come to our church, and if I just round, it's like there's about 500 when it's really like 449. Is that wrong? No, absolutely not. And so those are things that people really get confused about. Like, how dare they not say 449 instead of 500? You're wrong. No, like no one thought of it like that until people wanted to hate on that stuff. And so the numbers thing really is when they say like 7 months, like we read 1 Samuel chapter 6 verse 1, so for 7 months the hand of the Lord was heavy upon them, right?
Mm.
Does that mean exactly 7 months to the day? Like,
The
does
dot.
anybody really think that? And
Right.
why would you have to have it be exactly 7 months? Could it be just a period of time? Absolutely. Could it be 6 months and like 15 days? Absolutely. And so these are things that people will use to nitpick against the Bible, and then use that to say, look, it's not true. Therefore, all these other laws are not true.
Ah, I see.
To go to use things like that to say something against the moral law is, I believe, um, people's goal. So the
Mhm.
reason why they say stuff like that. I'll go a little bit into the numbers too for the benefit of this brother who sent in the question. The way they did generations back then in the ancient East is the same as if you are Asian today, you are the son of your ancestor.
Uh-huh.
That's what it is. I get it. In America, we don't really necessarily look at it that way, but you are your grandfather's son.
Mhm.
It is. You are your grandfather's son's son. That's
Yeah.
also true. But you are also thereby, by that, by that logic, your grandfather's son.
Transitive property.
Yeah, there's nothing wrong with saying that.
Uh-huh.
And when Matthew, well, this is the New Testament now, when Matthew talks about generations, he talks about 14 generations, between 14 generations, between 14 generations, all the way up to Jesus, right?
Mm.
So he takes Abraham to David, and things like that to all the way down to Jesus is my point, right? And were there exactly 14 generations? No, but 14 generations are out there because it's easier to memorize.
Yeah.
Not everybody had like an iPhone copy of the Bible back then. So
Uh-huh.
imagine people trying to memorize 14 generations. That's more than what we can do now, but
Yeah.
people did.
Yeah.
People memorized that stuff. And so if people used 14 generations as a mnemonic device to remember the goodness of God, that this lineage is not just something that we pulled or plucked out of the air, but there are real people involved.
Mm.
How awesome is that we have that kind of ancestry and lineage leading all the way back to Abraham and then Luke all the way back to Adam, that these are real people that God has used for his salvation plan.
Mm.
And that's the point, right? The point isn't, oh my goodness, he missed like a name here.
Yeah.
How dare they?
Yeah.
And they miss the point. What's the point of the narrative? What's the point of the narrative when they say a certain number of years? What's the point of the narrative when they say from this generation to this generation? Do you know the context? Do you know why the Bible has been written for this sort of understanding? And if you don't, yeah, of course, you're going to take it out of context and you're going to nitpick and you're going to say, because of this, we shouldn't take anything really seriously that the Bible says. And it's just something people use because they don't want to believe in God's word. But we do, yes, we do believe that the word of God is inerrant and infallible. And so it does not err in what it wants to portray to us, and it is unfailing in its authoritative teaching. And so that's where, we even have in our statement, like it is without error in its original writings. We just wanted to say that to clarify that copies can make mistakes, and we
Yeah.
do have copy errors that we have discovered over time, even in the Masoretic texts, and then we compare it with the Septuagint and things like that. And so, yeah, there's some scholarship work that is being done, obviously, and then that's natural, but it has never taken away from the message of the Bible.
Hmm.
And that's 100% true.
So I guess, this is more of an inerrancy question then. Let's just say, like we said, the Israelites were in the wilderness for 39 years instead of 40, right? Then it's not necessarily an error, but it wouldn't be 100% true, right? So then is that an error then? Or if we think that, that there is scholarship being done right now, but the way that we read the Bible is exegetically verse by verse. And so if that was the case, how do we reconcile these two types of thinking?
Yeah, I think it's because of the Western mind. And I think it's a good thing too. It's a good thing to be challenged by that. I think it's always good that we go over numbers. I love numbers personally too. And if we said something like, when God says man will live until 120 years, who lives to 120 years? So was God wrong?
Right,
Let's
right,
just reject the whole Bible then.
right,
And
right.
so if we're gonna nitpick on numbers, I have so much better ones
Mm.
than the ones that, let's say, this professor did.
Mm.
Or is it a round number? Is to show us in what vicinity this is for our benefit. So
Yeah.
39 as opposed to 40 is not 400. 400 is not 4,000, that
Mhm.
kind of thing. And
Mhm.
so it gives us a vicinity and understanding of what happened, to give us a picture, because it wasn't 4 years, it wasn't 4 hours, it was 40 years, which
Right.
is much more than that.
Right, right.
And I personally got to do the trek from Egypt up the Sahara into Israel.
You walked it?
No, we took camels
Oh
and
my
we took a
goodness.
car. Yeah, we took a car. It was fun.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, I personally did the trip. It does not take 40 years to get from Egypt to
Yeah.
Israel.
Yeah.
Yeah, it takes like a few hours.
Yeah.
But imagine, no, if walking would take like, longer than that, obviously.
Yeah.
But 40 years, that's to show the reader. So if you know the distance between Egypt, where they were, to Israel, the Canaanite land where they went to, 40 years meandering and wandering is an extreme number to show you how God wanted to discipline
Yep.
his people.
Yep.
That's the picture it shows you.
Mm-hmm.
To get lost in whether it's 39 or 40, and then that makes it inerrant or not, you've lost the context. You missed the point. You missed what the Bible is trying to show us, because you are nitpicking over numbers. And if you nitpick over numbers and go to hell, what's the point that you nitpicked over numbers?
Right.
Is the story of the Bible true? And if it's true, then we are responsible. So people are using whatever they can to not make it true, because they don't want to be responsible for what the Bible is saying we as men
Yeah.
or humans are responsible for.
Thank you for that, Pastor Eugene. Question number 2. Why did people in the Bible name their children names like Ichabod? Or the way Leah named her kids? Or even, I guess, the way that Leah is named, because it means weak eyes, right? So just asking about the seemingly strange names. Like, why would you name your child Ichabod, which means inglorious, right?
Mm-hmm.
So why would you ever want to name your child that? Why would you ever want to name your daughter Weak Eyes? Like, why would you ever want to do that? So, yeah, why did people in the Bible do that?
I think it's a fascinating thing when I go to names and like the etymology of names. I
Mm.
personally love it. Like, what does Samuel mean, right? What does Samuel mean?
It means the Lord hears.
Or the Lord has heard.
Mm.
Both of them work,
Mm.
right? And that's why it's a really, really nice name. I don't think anybody really deserves that name.
Thank you so much.
But yeah, when people would name, first of all, I love that the mothers got to name their child. So when they're housing the child in their womb for about 9 months, what they're thinking about is that what I should name the child. And what's fascinating is not just the naming method itself, is why they named the name they named the kid with.
Yeah.
And it was basically a marker of history.
Yeah.
You knew history by the name of the kid.
Yeah.
So if you had a kid named Ichabod, you knew that he was born at the time when they lost the Ark of God.
Mhm.
And so those are like pretty amazing things. So people knew by the names what their history was. And I really like that. Or, what they recognized about God. There was a point in their life. So if you continue to look at how even Leah would name her kids, it was a progression of her understanding, who God to be and how God revealed himself to her till she finally got to Judah, where she praised God, right?
Yeah.
And so there are names like that are amazing. Like there's Rachel's naming of her second born, which is, I don't know if you want to look it up. It's like son of my pain or something.
Mm.
And then, Jacob would rename the child son of my right hand, right?
Mm.
Because of her second child, Rachel died. And so that's why she named him the way she did. But then Jacob would rename him. And so in the Bible, there's a lot of renaming too, from Abram to Abraham,
Yep.
right? From just even, Simon to Cephas
Yeah.
and things like that. And the renaming is very significant. I think we've lost some of that. in our culture today. That's why we don't like fully appreciate, and we just name names because it sounds good,
Mm.
right? Like I really like this name. I don't know. You want to
Samuel.
like Absiday?
Absiday? That's a
Absiday.
name?
Absiday is a real name. There
Like
are many
Absidaisy.
people named Absiday, and it's spelled
Really?
ABCDE. That's a real name.
No, it's not. There's no way.
Yeah, there is.
Absiday.
Absiday. Because they just didn't want to think of a name, so they just wrote ABCDE and they call him Absiday.
Oh,
I know you're getting ideas. Anyway.
that's pretty good.
Yeah, I remember reading this story in the newspaper about a man while the mom was passed out. Yeah, signed his son's name as the New York Yankees because he loved the Yankees so much.
That's rough. Wow.
But there are reasons why we do things, and
Yeah.
then naming your kid, there's a reason why. I've always asked my mom, why did you name me the way you did?
Mm.
Even growing up, I hated my name. Now I love it. I grew into it. Way in my middle age now, I like it. But when I was a kid, I hated that name. I was like, this sounds so dumb.
Yeah.
What kind of name is this? And I asked my mom multiple times. She just said, I like the way it sounded. I was like, do you know what it means, Ma? So I would look it up, and now I appreciate it. But those are things that I hope that we can start. This is my personal belief that we will go back to naming our kids that have significance to show the world, this is a time in history where I want to name my kid this because of what I want to say about history, or what I want to say this is pointed to, or what God has shown me in my life about his goodness, his faithfulness, things like that.
Yeah.
And so, perhaps your parents named you Samuel. Did they name you Samuel?
They did.
Yeah, because they really either like the Samuel, the prophet, they wanted you to be a prophet, or maybe they even knew about the etymology that the Lord has heard their prayer and named you that.
I think the latter. I don't think I'm supposed to be a prophet.
Okay.
If you would like to know more, please listen to our Gifts podcast episode.
Yeah, I like that a lot. So yeah, I hope that takes. If
Yeah.
you don't, that's fine. You just want to name your kid a pretty name, then no judgment here. But that's not what I want, because you know me. I like the etymology. I like meaning.
Yeah.
And I want to give my kid some kind of meaning.
Yeah. Yeah. You always like the very interesting names like Jedediah,
Yeah,
Obadiah.
people that God loves. Yeah. Any
Yeah.
is what?
I actually don't know.
It's for Yahweh. Yeah.
Oh, that's
like
where it's from.
Elijah. Elijah is an amazing name because it's not Elijah in Hebrew. It's Elijah, right?
Yeah.
Or Elia, right? And Eli, El is for God, and Yah is for Yahweh. So it means God is Yahweh. That's Elijah, or Elijah,
Huh.
as we say it. So we put Jah because there's no J sound, or there's no Y sound. So that's why we say Jehovah instead
Yeah.
of, yeah. And so that's why we get Elijah. That's why we don't say Elijah. But anyway, those are all interesting things.
Yeah.
I, for one, am fascinated by the names. This is a great question, whoever sent it in. But I do like it that we have these names because it marked a period in history. So we know Ichabod is the time where they lost the ark.
Quick follow-up question. In the book of 1 Samuel, where we just read about Eli, what was Eli's full name?
That was his name.
Oh.
What? Oh, is there a joke? I'm sorry.
No,
I
there's
didn't-
no joke. Because people always think it means like, I don't know, like Elijah or something, or short for Elijah,
It's just Eli.
right? Elizabeth or something. I don't know. Anyway. Anyway. Last question for us this morning. This is in regards to the podcast episode that we did concerning the Uyghur Muslims and their situation in China. At what point do you act outside of prayer? Do you ever? So, for example, the special collection to Jerusalem that Paul mentions in his epistles, right? That wasn't normative, but it was an actual tangible way that they helped the church in Jerusalem. So, at what point do we do that? At what point do we act not outside of, but I guess in supplement to prayer?
Yeah, I mean, I would do if you pray, you would look for opportunities to support whatever you can support or denounce whatever you need to denounce, things like that. In regard to the Uyghur Muslims, I
Mhm.
remember when we started to find out, and the story started to become bigger. We also found out that that movie Mulan was shot like right across from the Uyghur Muslim
Yeah.
concentration camps.
Yeah.
Not watching would have been great.
Mm.
I mean,
Yeah.
not supporting them for doing something like that would have been great. I didn't.
Mm.
And then we knew that a lot of the masks were being made by slave labor there.
Really?
Yeah. And so, I mean, a lot of people, including myself, we refused to buy masks that were made in China.
Yeah.
And so those are things that you could have done. It's so hard though,
Mm.
it's hard you have to do so much more work.
Yeah.
I'm sure people have done more. Those are the two that I can think of off the top of my head.
Mm.
But I think prayer is main. When
Yeah.
prayer, like God moves things, he's the one that moves the pieces on the chessboard, right? It's not us. So we pray, we ask for mercy, and ultimately, it's not just to not kill the Uyghur Muslims, it's so that there will be revival in the nation of China,
Mm.
so that they're not so evil. They constantly steal, you know, our, what do you call our patents, our information,
Mm.
and things like that. And they just produce it cheaper. They've become a world power as a result. And now they are using whatever they can to manipulate whatever they can. I think there's just an evil government. And they, like, we know that they've killed Christians, imprisoned Christians, dismantled churches, broke up even underground meetings just to subject their authority.
Yeah.
They're just a terrible, terrible government. And so hopefully we can pray that God would, yeah, just take down that system
Yeah.
sooner the better.
So we can, in our Christian liberty, in supplement to our prayer, which is primary, still give to organizations that we've researched, like IJM or World Vision or places like that.
For me, I personally like Samaritan's Purse. So some
Uh,
people have asked, like, oh, what can we do to help the Ukraine war? And people have
yeah.
given some organizations, and we're finding out a lot of these organizations have some shady bits to them.
Yep.
But Samaritan's Purse is going in there, which is great. I
Yep.
heard Airbnb is doing something. Have you heard about this?
No, I haven't.
So Ukrainians are putting up their homes for rent through Airbnb, and they're housing like local families, but you can actually pay for those
Wow.
Airbnbs. So
Wow.
that
Okay.
money would directly go to a Ukrainian there.
Wow. Okay.
And so there are things that people have done. Look, I don't know how legit that is. Like,
Yeah.
I don't know if only rich people will get richer from that. I don't know. But, um, you know, that's why that's not primary. We do the best we can with the research that we can, but our primary is to pray and that God would use whatever means, yeah, to achieve his glory, to redeem like an oppressed people.
So our last question for today, in talking about evangelism and how harmful the sinner's prayer has been, Pastor Gene, you gave an example where Paul Washer canceled his flight home from Canada and stayed with the rancher to read the Bible with him. And the story, by the way, can be found in 10 Indictments Against the Modern Church on page 20.
Did you read? Is that your question?
No, I looked it up.
Okay.
Um, but so, you gave this example, but are you saying that this type of evangelism should be normative, or is this just amazing exception?
Is it what's normative? I think normative is to make disciples. That was the point.
I see. Okay.
Yeah, what's normative is to make disciples. You're not making disciples when you tell someone to recite a sinner's prayer and do some kind of ritualistic thing.
Hmm.
That's not evangelism, and that's not making disciples.
Yeah.
And so we have to get away from the false notion that doing the sinner's prayer or giving them a pamphlet is um, the sum of all that we need to do as far as evangelism is concerned. So hopefully we do that here in this church as well, and that's what we're trying to do. We have Bible studies, we have group studies, we have smaller groups, and we have larger groups,
Mm.
and we have the Sunday gathering where we get to learn and grow as disciples of Christ. And so those are things that every Christian needs to do. This is not an option.
Mm.
So if you're a disciple of Christ, you need to learn and be taught everything that Christ has commanded us to obey.
Thank you for that answer, Pastor Eugene. We thank you for listening to this episode of the Dear Church podcast. Join us next week as we talk about what we were actually going to talk about today, which is book recommendations, why Christians should be reading books, obviously the Bible, but why we should also be reading Christian books as well, and maybe some Christian book recommendations that we could give, perhaps even with the staff too, which would be fun. That'd be fun.
Sounds like a great idea.
We hope and pray that this has been a blessing in your ears. Fight the good fight, finish the race, keep the faith. Peace.